Hi, this is Mr. Eckert. We're going to go through the cell cycle, which is Target C12 in this video. So C12 says that you should be able to describe the main events in the cell cycle, and those are interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis, and you can see that two of those are divided into subparts. So here we go. What is the cell cycle? Cell cycle is a process by which cells divide and reproduce. So why do cells go through the cell cycle? Well, that happens when you grow. You have more cells in your body now than you did when you were in 5th grade, for example. If you get any kind of cut, injury, or burn, as the cells around that go through the cell cycle, then that injury heals. And because cells are living things, of course, they're going to eventually die, and so they're replaced by new cells that are going through the cell cycle. So just to review a little bit, you may or may not have had some of this before, but here you can see on the left in this diagram, it's reminding you that chromosomes are basically made up of DNA. Humans have 46 chromosomes. Over here, we see the DNA as it turns into a chromosome. You kind of look at this from the bottom going up. So here you have the DNA double helix. And in the process of becoming a chromosome, you can see that the DNA starts to wrap around these blue things. These are proteins called histones. So the DNA wraps around these protein molecules, and then it's not crystal clear, but those are coiling up, kind of like a slinky. So they start to coil, and then those coils scrunch together and form bigger coils, and that is called chromatin. So chromatin, with an N, is DNA that's been coiled up and scrunched together. Again, I think of kind of like a slinky. And then those bigger coils, which are called supercoils, then form chromosomes, which you can see here is often drawn in the shape of an X. So the cell cycle consists of three main parts, something called interphase, something called mitosis, and something called cytokinesis. Interphase makes up the longest part of the cell cycle. It takes up about 90% of the cell's life is spent in interphase. And interphase is made up of three parts. Now, as we go through these slides, you're going to see actual photographs of cells. This is a plant cell in interphase. This is an animal cell in interphase. And this, of course, is obviously a drawing of a cell in interphase. So the first part of interphase is something called G1. And in G1, the cell is going to grow, and it actually will double in size, and then all of its organelles and enzymes, which we've been talking about enzymes and how important those are, they also double. And if you think about it, that's kind of logical. If the cell is eventually going to split and form two cells, it would make sense that the new cells would want to have a complete complement of organelles and enzymes so that they can do all the cell functions that it's going to need to do. It also makes sense that the cell is going to grow before it splits, because if it doesn't grow, as it says here, the cell is going to get smaller and smaller every time it divides, and eventually you're not going to have anything left. S phase comes after G1, and S phase, remember we're still in interphase here. S phase, the DNA is going to copy itself. So before S, at the beginning of S, you have one copy of DNA. At the end, you have two identical copies. Again, that makes sense because each of the two new cells is going to want an equal complement of DNA. G2 is the last part of interphase, and in this, the cell is going to grow some more, and some of the structures and enzymes that are needed for mitosis, things like spindle fibers, are going to start to be made in G2. But again, growth is important. So the G1 and G2, they actually stand for gap, but to me, the G reminds me that the cell is growing during those. S actually stands for synthesis. When you synthesize something, you make something, and a copy of DNA is being made or synthesized in S. All right, after interphase comes something called mitosis, and mitosis consists of 4 phases. And just like you remembered a nonsense word, schnapps, which helped you to remember the 6 elements that make up 99% of all living things, this nonsense word PMAT is going to help you remember the 4 phases in order of mitosis. So the first is prophase. There's 3 main things that happen in prophase. 1, that chromatin that we talked about before that's condensed DNA, it's going to coil up and form chromosomes. So you're going to see chromosomes appear in prophase. You can kind of see down here these things that look almost like spiders or strands. Those are the chromosomes that are forming. The nuclear membrane is going to disappear. These chromosomes are going to start moving around in the cell, and they can't do that if they're in the nucleus. So it makes sense that we need to get rid of the nucleus, and that happens in prophase. And these centrioles and the spindle fibers that they make are first appear in prophase. So the spindle fibers are actually going to be what moves the chromosomes around. Metaphase is easy because it starts with an M. So I just think of metaphase. The chromosomes are moving to the middle of the cell, or it says here the center or the equator. And they get there by, well, the spindle fibers are actually going to move them. They attach to this central location in the chromosome called the centromere. So again, you can see that in these real cells down here. In anaphase, the A in anaphase reminds me of apart. So the chromosomes are pulled apart in anaphase. And they're actually pulled by the spindle fibers to opposite poles of the cells. And again, you can see that happening down here. These almost look like spiders as they're being pulled to opposite poles of the cells. In telophase, the three things that happened in prophase kind of reverse. So first of all, the chromosomes or chromatids. Now, this is actually kind of a mistake because they're not going to look like this anymore, like X's. They're going to have been pulled apart, so they're going to look like half of an X. Those are going to group at opposite ends of the cell. Remember, those chromosomes form during prophase, so now the chromosomes or chromatids unwind, and they go back to the long linear DNA, and you don't see them anymore. So you can say the chromosomes actually disappear. The nuclear membrane is going to come back. It's going to reform. And these centrioles and spindle fibers, remember the job of the spindle fibers was to move the chromosomes around. Well, you don't need them anymore. The chromosomes have disappeared, so the centrioles and spindle fibers, they also disappear. Notice that's kind of the opposite of what happens in prophase. Last is cytokinesis. In cytokinesis, cyto means cell, and kinesis is referring to the splitting of the cell. So the cytoplasm, the cell organelles, the cell itself divides, it splits into two cells. And each of those has an identical nucleus, has identical DNA, has all the organelles that it's going to need and enzymes in order to function. So in review, the cell cycle consists of these three main parts: interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. The end result is two cells. Now actually, again, this is a little misleading here. It says the parent and its daughter cells. They're both referred to as the daughter cells. The parent cell is the cell that we started with. So we have a cell at the beginning, that's the parent, and then it creates two daughter cells, and each of those have identical nuclei. And that does it for that target. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask.